The folder was sitting on the table in front of me when my mother walked into the room. It was a plain manila folder, the kind you buy in bulk from an office supply store. 12 for $2, nothing special about it. I had printed the documents inside 3 weeks earlier, slipped them into the folder, and set it on the passenger seat of my car every morning since. Just in case. I had driven to 4 different appointments with it sitting there untouched. That morning I had almost left it at home. I did not leave it at home. The closing office was on the 2nd floor of a building downtown, a suite of rooms with carpet the color of old mustard and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look like they hadn't slept. There was a long table in the center of the room with 6 chairs around it. A water pitcher. A box of tissues. I had been in rooms like this before, on different business, and I always noticed the tissues. Someone had decided that this kind of room, with this kind of table, required tissues. I sat down on the far side. I set the folder in front of me, parallel to the edge of the table, and I poured myself a glass of water from the pitcher. My mother came in 2 minutes later. She did not see me at first. She was talking to the buyer, a man named Gerald, who had the wide, satisfied look of someone who believed he had found a very good deal. Mom was in her good blazer, the navy one she wore to church and to any occasion she considered official, and she was saying something about the property taxes, how they had always been manageable, how the neighborhood was really coming up. She said this with the particular warmth she reserved for people she wanted something from. I had grown up watching that warmth get turned on and off. She saw me when she pulled out the chair across from Gerald. The warmth didn't go off exactly. It flickered. Her hand stayed on the back of the chair for a moment longer than it needed to. "Nadia," she said. "Hi, Mom," I said. She sat down. She arranged her own folder in front of her, thicker than mine, full of papers she had collected over the past 6 weeks, copies of things that were not hers to copy. I watched her settle in. I watched her nod at the title officer, a woman named Patricia, who was already pulling up something on her computer screen. I put my hand flat on top of my folder and I left it there. My mother had sold my grandfather's rental house for $387,000. She had negotiated the price herself, signed the listing agreement herself, accepted Gerald's offer herself, and scheduled this closing herself. She had done all of it without calling me once. She had told Gerald she was the owner. She had told Patricia she was the owner. She had told my sister, and probably half the people at her church, that she had finally done something useful with that old place. She had not called me because, as far as she knew, she did not need to. She was wrong about that. But she did not know it yet, and I had spent 6 years making sure she wouldn't. I want to tell you how we got here. I want to tell you about Grandpa, and the house, and the 6 years of work that my mother never once acknowledged, and the dinner 3 weeks ago when I finally understood what she intended to do. I want to tell you all of it because none of what happened at that closing table makes sense without it. So let me go back. My grandfather's name was Elias, and he had owned the house on Crestfield Avenue for 31 years before he died. He bought it in the 90s when the neighborhood was what real estate agents now call up and coming, and what everyone else called affordable because nobody wanted it. He paid $62,000 for it, fixed the porch himself over 2 summers, and rented it out to a rotating sequence of tenants whose names he kept in a spiral notebook on his kitchen counter. He never raised the rent more than $40 in any given year. He believed sincerely that a landlord who gouged his tenants was a particular kind of coward, and he said so often enough that I memorized it without trying to. I was the one who drove him to the hardware store on Saturday mornings. Not my mother, not my Aunt Cheryl, not my sister Priya, who was 3 years younger than me and had always been, in my mother's estimation, the one who needed protecting. I was 22 the first Saturday I drove him, still finishing my accounting degree, and he sat in the passenger seat with his list of supplies on a folded piece of paper and told me what each item was for. He explained things. He was the first adult in my family who consistently explained things to me, and I have never taken that for granted. When he died, I was 26. He left the house to me in a trust document that his attorney, a man named Walter Osei, had drawn up 4 years earlier. Grandpa had not told my mother about the trust. He had not told anyone. Walter had advised him to keep it quiet, and Grandpa had agreed, and so when the will was read, a separate document that left my mother and Aunt Cheryl each a small sum of cash, no one mentioned the house. My mother assumed the house passed to the family generally. She said this at the kitchen table the night after the reading, in the flat, confident tone she used when she had already decided something was true. "We'll figure out what to do with Elias's property," she said. "As a family." I did not correct her that night. I should explain why, because I know how that sounds. I should explain the particular geometry of our family, the way my mother had arranged it over decades so that she stood at the center of every decision and every resource, and so that I stood at the useful edge, close enough to do the work, far enough to be passed over for the credit. My sister Priya had always been the one who mattered more. I understood this not because anyone said it plainly. No one ever said it plainly, but because of 100 small arrangements. Priya got the bedroom with the window seat. Priya's college application essays were proofread by 3 adults. Priya's first car was a gift. Mine was a loan I paid back over 2 years, which my mother mentioned at Priya's wedding as evidence of my independence, as though the loan had been a kindness. Priya was not cruel. She was simply the beneficiary of a system she had not designed, and she accepted its benefits the way most people accept the systems they benefit from, without examining them too carefully. My mother's cruelty was not the dramatic kind. It was the administrative kind. She decided things. She arranged things. She did not ask because asking implied that your answer might matter. When Grandpa died and she said, "We'll figure out what to do with Elias's property as a family," she meant that she would figure it out and the rest of us would agree. I decided that night that I would not correct her until I understood exactly what she intended to do. I called Walter Osei the next morning. He confirmed that the deed transfer was clean and recorded, that I was the sole owner of record for the property at 1147 Crestfield Avenue, and that my mother had no legal standing to make any decisions about it. He asked if I wanted to inform the family. "Not yet," I said. "All right," Walter said. "The property is yours either way." The tenant in the house when Grandpa died was a woman named Mrs. Fontaine, who had lived there for 11 years and paid her rent 2 days early every single month. She called me the week after the funeral to say she was sorry about Elias, that he had been a good man, and to ask, gently, who she should be sending her checks to now. I told her to send them to me. I set up a separate account for the property income and started keeping records from the first month. Over the next 6 years, I managed 1147 Crestfield Avenue the way Grandpa had managed it, carefully, without drama, and without raising the rent more than was fair. I want you to understand what that looked like in practice because my mother would later describe the property as sitting there doing nothing, and I want you to have the other version. In the spring of the first year, I hired a plumber to replace the corroded section of pipe under the kitchen sink that Grandpa had mentioned needing attention. $840, paid from the rental income account, noted in the ledger, Mrs. Fontaine's kitchen functional again by Friday. That fall, when she told me the furnace was making a sound, I had an HVAC technician out within the week. The furnace had 2 winters left in it, the technician said, so I started setting aside $200 a month from the rental income specifically for the replacement. By the second winter I had enough. The new furnace went in on a February Tuesday. I renegotiated the property insurance policy in year 2. Grandpa's plan had gone 9 years without review, and I found comparable coverage at $340 less per year, switched it, noted the savings. I filed the property tax returns for 6 consecutive years, organized every receipt, and built a depreciation tracking spreadsheet over 2 Sunday afternoons that I color-coded by category. In year 3, Mrs. Fontaine's adult son moved in temporarily while he got back on his feet. I had her sign an updated lease addendum, handled it cleanly, and by month 4 he had found his own place. In year 4 I got 3 bids for exterior paint, selected the middle one, and supervised 2 of the 3 workdays myself. In year 5 I replaced the porch railing, the same porch Grandpa had fixed himself over 2 summers, because the wood had finally gone soft at the base posts. By the start of year 6, the property account held $23,400 after all expenses. I had never touched it for anything personal. I sat in Mrs. Fontaine's kitchen once in year 3 while her son was still there. She brought out a sweet potato pie and told me about the first time Grandpa had come to fix her leaking window, how he had brought his own caulk gun and wouldn't take any money for it. He said the window was the house's problem, not mine, she told me. I've never forgotten that. I thought about Grandpa's spiral notebook. I thought about his list of names, all the tenants he had kept track of by hand, and I understood, sitting in Mrs. Fontaine's kitchen with sweet potato pie, that taking care of the house was a form of continuing a conversation with him. That it was the only form left. My mother knew none of this. She had never asked. I found out what she had done on a Thursday night 3 weeks before the closing table. She called a family dinner. She did this occasionally. A Sunday roast or a weeknight meal at her house, the round table in the dining room that had been Grandpa's before her, the one with the leaf you had to wrestle in from the hall closet. Priya came with her husband, Marcus. Aunt Cheryl was there. I brought a bottle of wine that nobody opened. Mom made her lamb chops, the ones with the rosemary, which she only made when she was in a particular mood. I noticed the lamb chops and I sat down and I waited to find out what the mood was for. She waited until after dessert. She waited until the dishes were stacked and the coffee was poured, and then she set her cup down and said, "I have some news about Elias's house." "What kind of news?" Aunt Cheryl asked. "I've accepted an offer," my mother said. "Gerald Hutchins, you remember the Hutchins family from Riverside, he's been looking for a rental property for a while. He offered $387,000 and I said yes." The room was quiet for a moment. "When did you list it?" I asked. 6 weeks ago, my mother said. I used Denise Para. She's been in the business 30 years, very professional. "You listed Grandpa's house 6 weeks ago," I said. "Elias's house, yes." She looked at me steadily. "It's been sitting there long enough." "It hasn't been sitting there," I said. "Mrs. Fontaine lives there." "Mrs. Fontaine has a month-to-month lease." She was notified. "She has 60 days. I looked at my coffee cup. The surface of the coffee was still. I looked at it for a moment and then I looked back up. "Mom," I said, "who do you think owns that house?" She set her napkin on the table. "The family owns that house, Nadia. It came to us when Elias died." "Did you look at the will?" "I have a copy of the will." "The will left you and Aunt Cheryl a cash distribution," I said. "It didn't mention the house." "Which means it came to the family," she said, in the tone she used when she was explaining something obvious to someone she found exhausting. "Assets not specifically distributed revert to the surviving family. That's how it works." "That's not how it works," I said. Priya looked at her husband. Marcus studied his coffee. "Nadia." My mother's voice dropped half a register. "I am trying to do something productive for this family. That house has needed attention for years and nobody has done a thing with it." I said nothing. "I've been managing it for 6 years," I said after a moment. "Collecting rent," she said. "Which is not the same as making a decision." "I've been managing that property since the month Grandpa died," I said. "Replacing the furnace, filing 6 years of property taxes, renegotiating the insurance, hiring the plumber for the kitchen pipe, repainting the exterior, replacing the porch railing, handling the lease addendum when Mrs. Fontaine's son moved in, setting aside $200 a month until the capital account held over $23,000, none of which you ever asked about, because you assumed there was nothing to ask. You've been playing landlord with a property that belongs to all of us," my mother said. "And you didn't consult anyone." "I didn't need to consult anyone," I said. "You absolutely did." She leaned forward slightly. "This is a family asset. This is Elias's legacy. And you have been making unilateral decisions about it for 6 years without saying a single word to me or to Cheryl or to your sister." "I own it," I said. The room went completely quiet. Aunt Cheryl looked at my mother. Priya set down her fork. "What did you say?" my mother asked. "I own the house," I said. "Grandpa put it in a trust before he died. The deed transferred to me when he passed. I'm the owner of record." My mother looked at me for a long moment. Something moved across her face. Not quite disbelief, more like the expression of someone who has just found an unexpected step in the dark and caught themselves before falling, but only barely. "That is not possible," she said. It's recorded at the county, I said. Elias would not have done that without telling me. He told his attorney. His attorney was an old man who made mistakes. Walter Osei is 61 and his records are clean, I said. Nadia. My mother's voice was very even now, the way a surface is even just before something underneath it shifts. I have accepted an offer on that house. There is a signed purchase agreement. The closing is scheduled for the 23rd. I know, I said. You knew about the closing? I received a notice from the title company, I said. Standard procedure when there's an owner of record. My mother looked at me. I looked back at her. Then why, she said, did you not say anything? I'm saying something now, I said. That is not an answer. She pushed back from the table slightly. That house has been in this family for 30 years. Your grandfather worked for that house. And you are sitting there telling me you have been holding a deed over all of us for 6 years and said nothing? I said nothing because I was waiting to see what you would do, I said. What I would do, she repeated. Yes. She stood up. She picked up her coffee cup and carried it to the kitchen and set it in the sink. We could all hear the particular sound of a cup set in a sink by someone who is exercising significant restraint. She came back to the doorway. I want to see this deed, she said. You'll see it at the closing, I said. I want to see it tonight. The closing is the right place to discuss it, I said. With Patricia there and Gerald and the attorneys. Gerald has put down earnest money, my mother said. Gerald has plans for that property. You cannot simply walk into a closing and… I own the property, I said. I can do whatever I decide to do at the closing. Priya said quietly, Mom. My mother looked at her. Priya had nothing to add. She just said it again. Mom. Your sister, my mother said to Priya, has been sitting on information that affects this entire family for 6 years and thinks she can just walk in and… She owns the house, Priya said. My mother looked at Priya for a moment. Then she looked at me. We will discuss this further, she said. Okay, I said. I want Elias's attorney's number. You can reach Walter Osei through his office, I said. I'll text you his number. Tonight. Tonight, I said. I texted her the number from my car, sitting in her driveway before I started the engine. I sat there for a moment with my phone in my hand and the engine off. The light was still on in the dining room. I could see the outline of the curtain through the window. I started the car and drove home. I took out the manila folder that night and laid the documents across my kitchen table. The deed. The trust instrument. Walter's certification letter. The county recording stamp with the date. I looked at them for a while. Then I put them back in the folder and put the folder in my bag. The closing was in 3 weeks. I had everything I needed. My mother called Walter Osei the next morning. He called me afterward to let me know. He said she had been composed on the phone, businesslike, the way people are when they are trying to find a procedural exit from a situation they cannot win on substance. She had asked about the trust instrument, the date of execution, whether it could be challenged on the grounds that Grandpa had not been of sound mind. Walter had told her the trust had been prepared 4 years before Grandpa's death, that 2 independent witnesses had signed, and that the document had been reviewed by a second attorney at the time of execution. He told her there was no viable challenge. She had thanked him and hung up. Walter told me all of this in the same calm, informational tone he used for everything, and then he said, She's going to show up at the closing. I know, I said. Do you want me there? No, I said. I have what I need. What I had was the folder. I had carried it to 4 appointments over 3 weeks, and it had sat on my passenger seat untouched, and now the closing was 2 days away. I went through the documents one more time at my kitchen table on a Tuesday night. The deed recorded and stamped. The trust instrument, 12 pages. Walter's certification letter on his firm's letterhead. The county recording confirmation with the file number and the date. A printout of the property record from the county assessor's website, showing my name, my address, and the transfer date. The kind of document a title officer could verify in 90 seconds on any county database. I had printed that last item specifically because verification was the point. I was not going to that table to argue. I was going to show. I read through each document. I found no errors because there were no errors to find. I checked the page order against the list I had made when I first assembled the folder 3 weeks earlier. I stacked them in order. I slid them back into the folder. I closed the folder. I wrote the closing address on the back in black pen. I capped the pen. I set the folder on the corner of the table. I turned off the kitchen light. I went to bed. In the morning I put the folder in my bag. I drove downtown. I found parking 2 blocks from the building. I walked to the entrance. I took the elevator to the 2nd floor. I found the suite with the mustard carpet and the long table. I poured a glass of water from the pitcher. I sat down on the far side of the table, parallel to the edge. I placed the folder in front of me, face down. I waited. Patricia, the title officer, came in first. She set up her laptop, arranged her papers, and said good morning to me in the brisk, pleasant way of someone who has done this particular job long enough to find its rhythms comfortable. She did not ask me why I was there. The owner of record sitting at a closing table requires no explanation. Gerald came in next with a younger man I assumed was his son. Gerald had the wide, comfortable look I had noticed in the hallway, the look of someone who had already mentally arranged the furniture in a property he did not yet own. He nodded at me. I nodded back. My mother came in 2 minutes later. She saw me the same way she had in my memory of 100 other rooms. The flicker, the hand on the chair back, the recovery. "Nadia," she said. "Hi, Mom," I said. She sat across from Gerald. She arranged her folder. She did not look at me again immediately. Patricia began going through the preliminary documents, the purchase agreement, the title commitment, the closing disclosure. Gerald initialed where Patricia indicated. My mother watched and did not initial anything because she had not been given anything to initial, and I watched her notice this. "Mrs. Adeyemi," Patricia said, looking at her screen, "I do need to flag something before we go further. There appears to be an existing owner of record on this property." My mother looked up. "That would be a clerical issue," my mother said. "The property came to our family when my father passed. There may be paperwork that wasn't updated." "The deed transfer is recorded and dated," Patricia said. "It predates your father's death by 4 years." My mother's hands were very still on top of her folder. "That's not possible," my mother said. I reached for my folder. I slid it across the table toward Patricia. "These are the originals," I said. "There's also a county assessor printout if you'd like to pull the record directly." Patricia opened the folder. She looked at the first page. She looked at her screen. She typed something. "The record matches," Patricia said. Gerald looked at my mother. The younger man looked at Gerald. "Mom," I said, "the house belongs to me. It has belonged to me since Grandpa died. That's what I've been trying to tell you." "You have been deliberately concealing this," my mother said. Her voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. "For 6 years you have let me believe." "I never told you it was yours," I said. "You never told me anything." "No," I said. "I didn't." "That is a form of deception, Nadia. That is a deliberate." "Mom." I kept my voice even. "You listed a house that wasn't yours. You accepted an offer on a house that wasn't yours. You told Gerald you were the owner. I believed I was the owner. The family believed." "You decided you were the owner," I said. "Without asking anyone." Gerald cleared his throat. "I'm sorry," he said, "but I need to understand what we're dealing with here. Is the title clear or not?" "The title is clear," Patricia said. "The owner of record is Nadia Adeyemi." Gerald looked at me. "The sale can proceed if you choose to authorize it," Patricia said to me. "Or it can be stopped. That's your call." My mother looked at me. There was something in her face I had not seen there before. Not anger, which I had seen many times, but something more like vertigo, the expression of someone whose footing has shifted without warning. "Nadia," she said, "Gerald has put down earnest money. He has plans. You cannot simply." "You told me this house had been sitting there long enough," I said. She stopped. "You told Mrs. Fontaine she had 60 days. I kept my voice level. You told me I had been playing landlord with a property that belonged to all of us." My mother said nothing. "So I want you to hear me say this clearly: the property belongs to me. It has always belonged to me. And I am going to decide what happens to it." I picked up my folder. I straightened the documents inside it. I closed it. "Gerald," I said, "I'm sorry for the confusion today. You'll hear from me within the week about how I'd like to proceed. Patricia, thank you." I stood up. I pushed my chair in. I picked up my bag. My mother said, "Nadia, we are not finished." "Yes, we are," I said. "For today." I walked out of the room. The door closed behind me with the ordinary sound of a door that has been pulled shut by someone with both hands free. Gerald, as it turned out, was a reasonable man. I called him 4 days after the closing appointment, and we had a straightforward conversation. He still wanted the property. I told him my conditions. Mrs. Fontaine would be allowed to remain through the end of her natural tenancy, which meant as long as she wanted, and the sale price would reflect the property's actual current value, which Walter's colleague had assessed at $394,000. Gerald agreed to both conditions without a significant argument. The paperwork was completed 3 weeks later, cleanly, with everyone signing what they were authorized to sign. Mrs. Fontaine called me when she received the updated lease paperwork from Gerald's property manager. She said she understood, that she was grateful for the fair treatment, and that she had made her peace with change. She said my grandfather would have been proud of how I handled things. I sat in my car in a parking lot and held my phone for a moment after she said that. Priya called me the day after the original closing appointment. "She's upset," Priya said. "I know," I said. "She said you ambushed her." "I sat at a table with a folder," I said. "That's not an ambush." Priya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Why didn't you tell me about the deed?" I thought about that. "Because I didn't know what you'd do with it," I said. "I didn't know whose side you'd be on." "I'm on your side," Priya said. "I know that now," I said. "I've always been on your side." "You've always loved me," I said. "That's a little different." She didn't have an answer for that. We stayed on the phone for a while without saying much, which was its own kind of conversation, and when we hung up I felt something I hadn't expected. Not relief exactly, more like the particular lightness of a thing that has been resolved without being destroyed. My mother and I did not speak for 6 weeks after the closing. When she finally called, she did not apologize in any direct form. She said she wished things had been handled differently. She said she understood now that she had overstepped. She said she would have liked to have been told about the trust years earlier, and I agreed with her that that conversation would have been better than the one we had at the closing table, and we both sat with that for a moment. We're not fixed. I don't know if we ever will be. But she is still my mother, and the phone calls have started again, and there is something to be said for that. Something small and honest and not nothing. Here is what I know about family and money and the spaces where they overlap. We are taught, almost from birth, that love means giving without keeping count. That the person who tracks the cost of things is the cold one, the ungrateful one, the one who doesn't really understand what family is for. But I spent 6 years keeping count on behalf of a house that nobody asked about, a tenant nobody called to check on, a furnace nobody replaced, a porch nobody repaired. I kept count not because I was cold, but because someone had to, and the person who always ends up keeping count is the one who actually cares what happens. Love without accountability isn't generosity. It's just leverage waiting to be used. If you've ever been the one in your family who shows up without being thanked, who manages without being acknowledged, who is expected to be useful and invisible at the same time, you already know what the folder on that table meant. It wasn't revenge. It was a receipt. The most protective thing you can do for the people you love is to be clear about what is yours. If this story made you think of someone in your own family, share it with them. And if you've ever had to put a folder down on a table to make someone finally hear you, tell me about it in the comments. I'd like to know what was in yours. If you're new here, subscribe to Revenge Signal. We'll be here when you need us. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment purposes. All characters, names, events, and situations are entirely fictional, and any resemblance to real persons or events is coincidental.